Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was a paramedic for 6 years before the city fell apart. I learned how to count by pulse, how to read a person's face better than any monitor, and how long a minute can stretch when you cannot stop the clock. None of it prepared me for holding a bridge through the night. My name is Marcus DeSoto. On the first night of the outbreak in San Francisco, I found myself standing on the southbound deck of the Golden Gate Bridge with a dead officer at my feet, 3 soldiers who were already down to half of their magazines, 2 mechanics who could barely keep their hands from shaking, a family with 2 children tucked behind an armored door, and a city bus parked crosswise to make a wall. The radio on the officer's vest said to hold until sunrise. Sunrise was about 10 hours away. We reached the bridge a little before 8 p.m. The sun was gone, but there was a dull orange glow on the water from burning buildings along the Embarcadero. The fog had thinned, not the thick blanket people imagine, but a moving sheet that drifted across the cables and opened now and then to show the towers and the traffic lights that were still cycling even though nobody was paying attention to them. We were headed north. The quarantine checkpoints around the city had broken in the afternoon, and word spread that the bridge might still be open. By the time we landed on the approach at the Presidio side, the roadway was a maze of stalled cars and abandoned service trucks. People had tried to get across, panicked, and blocked each other. Some vehicles were empty, some were not. Our convoy formed in the breakdown lane and moved forward in fits. We had one National Guard M1083 cargo truck with sandbags and 2 pallets of supplies strapped down with ratchet straps. We had 2 Humvees, one with an M240 mounted on a ring, and the other with extra fuel cans and bags of water. There were 4 civilian SUVs, a pickup, and the bus. The bus driver was a city employee named Isaiah Coleman. He was calm, kept both hands at 9 and 3, and did exactly what we asked. The guard officer in charge was Second Lieutenant Andrew Taylor. He was young but competent, and he did not pretend to know more than he did. He had 3 enlisted soldiers, Specialist Hannah Pitts, Specialist Jorge Barajas, and Private First Class Devin Riley. The 2 mechanics were brothers, Eric and Tony Costa, who had spent the day towing disabled cars off the ramp so the emergency vehicles could get through. The family was the Arroyos, Elena and Daniel with their kids, Sophie and Max, ages 9 and 6. There were other people in the line who looked to us for direction. Some stayed when we told them to stay, some did not. On the span, the wind came in steady gusts from the Pacific. The main towers rose ahead like 2 dark walls with crossbeams. This bridge is long. The main span from tower to tower is over 4,000 feet. The total length is about 1.7 miles. The roadway is 6 lanes with a movable barrier separating northbound and southbound lanes. On the west side is the sidewalk for bikes. On the east side is the pedestrian walkway. At that time, both had locked gates, but the gates were flimsy compared to the weight of people desperate to get through. The cables hummed when the wind hit them. We were 3 vehicles from the south tower when I heard the shot. It wasn't ours. It came from the east walkway, somewhere near the tower base. Then there were screams, then more shots. Then the radio crackled with overlapping voices that meant someone was giving an order and no one was listening. Lieutenant Taylor stepped out of his Humvee and waved us forward. I followed with Isaiah's bus. The cargo truck came behind us. The 2 SUVs in the rear honked and tried to keep up. I saw a cluster of people running along the east walkway, slamming into the locked gate that separated it from the roadway. Some were hurt. Some were chasing the hurt. The difference was obvious from the way they moved. The chasing ones did not stop to look for help. They just kept coming. We turned the bus across the southbound lanes at an angle and pressed it against the movable concrete barrier. The bus doors faced west. Isaiah opened them so we could move people and gear through. The Humvee with the M240 pulled forward on the right and parked nose to the tower base. The other Humvee backed in to create a narrow funnel. The cargo truck parked behind the bus and dropped the tailgate. I was in the middle of all of it, moving as fast as I could without running. There is a pace you learn in emergency work. Running wastes energy and causes mistakes. Walking fast gets you there breathing and thinking. The first wave reached the gate. The gate held for a moment. Then the latch bent and the lower hinge snapped and the gate swung into the roadway. The first man through was older, white hair, grey jacket, fresh blood on his mouth and neck. He did not speak or hesitate. He moved straight toward the nearest person, as if pulled by a rope. Specialist Pitts fired a controlled pair from her M4 and the man fell. She kept firing at chest level, then adjusted to the head when she saw that was what stopped them. The others took the cue. There is no poetry in choosing where to aim. It's mechanics and outcome. It either works or it doesn't, and you correct until it works. Lieutenant Taylor started to call for a withdrawal to the middle of the span, but he did not finish the sentence. He took a hit from the side. I did not see who delivered it. 1 second he was there, the next he was down. I reached him with my aid bag and did a quick assessment under the glare of a Humvee's spotlight. I had gloves on, goggles off my helmet strap, and my headlamp canted down. He had lost too much blood already, and his airway was compromised. I did what I could. It was not enough. I closed his eyes and unhooked the radio from his vest because someone had to keep talking to the people listening. Pitt saw what I was doing and nodded without stopping her fire. She was steady. More civilians came from the south approach behind us. Most looked intact. A few didn't. I stood up and put my hands up at shoulder height and told them to stop 10 yards short. Isaiah opened the rear door of the bus and we started to filter people inside. Elena and Daniel helped pull children and elderly up the step. The officer we were calling the wounded officer was a San Francisco Police Department sergeant named Kenyon Park. He had a laceration on his thigh and a deep bruise on his ribs from an earlier crash. He could walk with a limp. He could hold a pistol one-handed and hit a torso-sized target at 20 feet. He stayed with me near the center of the funnel and kept his eyes on the rear traffic. If someone came toward us in a way that fit the pattern we were learning fast, he acted without waiting for a consensus. We stacked sandbags across 2 lanes to our right and left, building low walls with firing positions every few feet. Tony and Eric hauled the bags like they had been doing this work all their lives. The M1083's tailgate rattled as sandbags slid forward. Barrages and Riley ran them into place and dropped to a knee behind them. The M240 gunner, Pitts, clipped the T&E, traverse and elevation, mechanism to control her arc so she would not swing across our own people. She checked headspace and timing. Then she fired a short test burst into the empty lane and watched the Lynx arc out of the feed tray. The sound was a deep rip that rolled off the water. I climbed onto the front step of the bus and spoke loudly to the people inside. I told them what was happening and what we expected to do. I asked anyone with medical training to identify themselves. We had 1 retired nurse and a pharmacy tech. I moved them to the front seats and handed them gauze rolls and elastic bandages. I told them not to waste supplies. If a dressing soaked through, add another on top rather than tearing the first off. I told them to keep hands clean and use gloves from the box no matter how rushed things got. I told them to keep children low and behind the seats. Clear instructions calm people. Vague reassurances do not. The radio on Lieutenant Taylor's vest was still hot with traffic. I kept it on my collar and pushed the button with the side of my thumb while I worked. The message was the same on every channel we tried. Hold the span. Hold until morning. Helicopters inbound just before sunrise. Dispatchers repeated the time in the same even voice. If they were improvising, they were doing it well. I did not believe the helicopters would come. I have learned that when orders are simple and unchanging in a fluid situation, either they do not have more to give you or they are buying time. I kept the doubt to myself. People need tasks, not speculation. At around 9:30 p.m, we had 3 layers of defense. The bus and the cargo truck made the main barrier along the movable concrete divider. The 2 Humvees formed the sides of a funnel. The sandbags and car doors filled the gaps. Isaiah angled the bus slightly so the left headlight lit the east walkway intersection. The Humvee spotlight lit the west. We could see silhouettes out beyond the lights, moving between abandoned cars. The wind carried sounds along the steel. Some were normal, shoes on deck plating, doors slamming, voices. Some were not. The first hour was controlled. We fired single shots. We counted rounds. I made people call out when they reloaded, so those on either side knew not to expose themselves at the same moment. The soldiers called their remaining magazines at the top of each quarter hour. The civilians learned quickly. Daniel took his place behind the sandbags and shot slowly and accurately with a borrowed M4. Elena kept the children low and quiet. Sergeant Park stayed near me, watching the rear and spotting for the gunners. Eric and Tony ran ammo cans from the cargo truck to the Humvee and back again, then went to the rear to pull car batteries so we could add another set of lights. We had about 400 rounds for the rifles at the start and a little more for the machine gun. That sounded like a respectable number when I counted it in the truck. It is not when the night is long and the span is crowded. Shots disappear by the dozen. Every mistake costs 10. Every time someone fires on impulse, the magazine evaporates. Close to 11 p.m., the machine gun's barrel started to glow a dull red. It was not a movie red, just a heat shimmer and a color shift you notice if you've seen it before. Pitts kept her burst short, but there had been too many targets in a tight arc. I told the mechanics to bring water, but not to pour it on the barrel. Rapid cooling can warp steel and ruin the weapon. We changed barrels instead. Pitts locked the bolt to the rear, donned heat-resistant gloves, and performed the swap by muscle memory while Barashas covered the arc with his rifle. I logged the time and the round count, because habits matter even when you think you will not see the end of the shift. Around midnight, we split into two formal lines, north and south. The bridge deck bends slightly, and the central area by the south tower becomes a natural choke point. We kept the triage zone in the mid lane behind the bus and stacked our remaining med supplies under the first row seats. We had IV sets, saline, tourniquets, chest seals, gauze, and a limited supply of antibiotics. The retired nurse, Mrs. Tully, had a calm voice and hands that did not shake. She cleaned and wrapped what we could treat and told the others hard truths in plain language when they asked things she could not promise. People accepted honesty better than hopeful lies. Between 12:30 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. we held steady. The lights from our vehicles carved clear cones out of the dark. Inside them we could see well enough to place shots. Outside them we saw movement low and high as people climbed around stalled cars or came up the walkway gates. The sound pattern shifted without warning. The steady crunch of feet became a chaotic drumbeat, like a stampede. Then the north end lit with the scattered headlights of more vehicles being turned on, and a wave of people ran toward us from the Marin side. It was not just the city behind us anymore. The other end had broken too. Sergeant Park moved to the north side and called out distances like a range officer. 50 yards, 40, 30, head height at your front, 1 step left. His voice cut through the gunfire and the wind. Barashas and Riley adjusted their aim and their breathing to the cadence. We still had discipline then. It was the last hour that felt professional. At around 2 a.m., a man tried to drive a small hatchback along the east sidewalk with 2 wheels on the curb and 2 on the deck. He made it 20 yards, hit a post, and spun into the lane. The car blocked our line of fire for a moment, and a pocket of infected used it as cover to close the distance. We lost 2 civilians in that push. Both were within arm's length when it happened. We pulled the rest back 10 yards and reset the line. Isaiah used the bus horn once to stop a group of panicked people from running across our firing line. It worked better than shouting. After that, when we needed to break the panic wave, he tapped the horn twice. People learned the pattern. The machine gun overheated again at around 2:45 a.m. This time, Pitts had to ride the trigger longer to stop a group that found a gap between 2 abandoned cars on the west side. The barrel change took longer because she had burns on her left wrist despite the gloves. She swore under her breath and kept going. Eric brought a plastic pitcher of water and wet down the receiver carefully without touching the barrel. Steam rose and drifted away in the wind. The gun kept working. I made a mental note to check her wrist later. I never did. By 3 a.m. our ammo count was under half. The rifleman had 3 magazines each. The machine gun had 2 full cans and 1 partial. The handguns were down to a handful of loose rounds. We had a flare gun with 4 flares. The big floodlight cables started to hum and flicker because the alternator on the Humvee had been straining for hours. Tony rigged a daisy chain from car batteries with jumper cables to keep the lights going. It was not pretty, but it worked. At 3:20 a.m., the first actual betrayal happened. It was not a cinematic moment. Tony Costa, the younger brother, decided he was done. He ran to the cargo truck, jumped in, and tried to drive it forward through the gap between the bus and the barrier. The truck hit the sandbag wall, broke it, and slid toward the edge. The tailgate smashed into the side of the bus. The pallet straps snapped. Boxes slid and burst open. The forward motion opened a corridor on the right side that did not exist before. The infected saw the change the same moment we did. They rushed the gap. I was 10 steps from Tony when he did it. I yelled to stop. He didn't. I saw his face for half a second through the windshield. It was not angry. It was empty. He was in a tunnel in his head where nothing but forward existed. The truck stalled as the front wheels rode up onto a sandbag stack. He fought the gear shift. The engine coughed. The wave hit the open lane. Barrages shifted to meet it. Riley did too. They both emptied their magazines in less than a minute and called out for reloads. Pitts pivoted the machine gun and raked the gap with a long burst that she could not afford, and that still did not stop all of them. I made a decision then that put other people at risk just to close a hole. I sprinted to the truck, climbed the step, and pulled Tony out by his collar. I dragged him back to the bus door and shoved him inside. He tried to argue that we should all just drive. There was nowhere to drive. We did not have a path. He did not want to see it. I told Isaiah to lock the bus and keep everyone down. Elena took one look at me and knew what this meant. She put her arms around her children and held them so they could not see over the seatbacks. I went back to the gap. We had lost the forward sandbag wall. I told Eric to swing the Humvee's nose in tight and block it with the bumper. He did it and scraped the paint on the barrier so hard the sparks looked like a cutting wheel. The metal held. After that, the night became a repetition of the same sequence with fewer resources each time. Push, reorganize, hold, push, reorganize, hold. The city glowed behind us and then dimmed as the closest fires burned out. The wind shifted a few degrees. The sound changed. It was colder. I watched the clock on the police radio and noted each minute like I was waiting for medicine to take effect. I tried not to think about what would happen when the minute hand made the final circle and found us in the same place. Just before 4 a.m., I found Sergeant Park sitting with his back against a bumper. He was pale. I checked his thigh dressing and found a slow seep through the bandage. He had kept it to himself rather than take a set of hands off the line. I tightened the tourniquet by a quarter turn and he hissed, but did not complain. He handed me his radio and told me to keep it if he could not. I told him to stand up and he did. I kept him close to me after that, not because he needed protecting, but because I could make use of his voice and his judgment without turning to find him. At 4:10 a.m., the helicopter's inbound message repeated with the same steady tone. I asked for confirmation of the number of aircraft and the landing point. The dispatcher did not answer directly. She said, "Hold your position. Do not permit crossing. Aircraft will arrive at sunrise." It was a script. I knew it because I've had to read scripts when dispatch centers go to emergency mode. There is a set of phrases that plug holes when you have nothing new to offer. The thought did not change what we had to do. We still had to keep people alive until the light came. By 4:25 a.m., we were down to 2 magazines per rifle. The machine gun had 1 can. Pitts used short bursts only. Even then, I watched the belt shrink and felt a physical ache at each link that clattered to the deck. I have never cared much about equipment. That night, I cared about every piece of metal that could be turned into a few seconds of control. We could hear movement above us in the steel. People had climbed the cables and the maintenance ladders. Some of them got onto the crossbeams and moved along them like they were catwalks. Their footsteps echoed differently, a higher ring. I looked up and saw shapes moving on the lower struts of the south tower. They were not thinking about safety lines or slip hazards. They just moved forward in straight lines no matter where the lines led. At 4:40 a.m., I made the call to pull everyone to the central tower platform. I chose it because it was elevated, narrow, and reachable with a single stair. If we could block the stair and the access points, the numbers would matter less. The cost was clear. We would abandon the vehicles, the bulk of our supplies, and any easy retreat path. But if we stayed on the deck, we would be overwhelmed before the light returned. I told Isaiah to load only water, bandages, and the flare gun. Mrs. Tully grabbed the meds. Elena and Daniel took one backpack each and carried their kids. Eric took one ammo can and a duffel of loose rifle rounds. Tony kept his eyes on the floor and carried nothing. We formed a wedge around the civilians with the soldiers on the outside and Sergeant Park and me on the rear. The stair to the tower platform is a metal structure bolted to the side of the tower base with safety cage rings around it. It is not meant for mass traffic. We moved in pairs, not in a panic but not slowly either. The machine gun fired bursts to our left to discourage a group that had seen us shift. Then it fired a final burst and clicked on an empty feed tray. Pitts cleared the action and slung the weapon across her chest like a dead weight. Barashas passed her his last magazine and she tucked it into her vest. At 4:55 a.m. we reached the platform. It is an open grid floor with a waist-high rail. There are access hatches to the inside of the tower, but they were locked. I checked. The locks were simple padlocks, but we had left the bolt cutters on the deck. The platform had a clear view of both directions. The light from the east was a pale grey line on the horizon. We set the children and the wounded in the centre and put our backs to the rail in a loose circle. The stair opening was the critical point. We used a steel tool chest that was bolted to the platform to block half of it, and a heavy maintenance sign to block the other half. It would not stop a determined push, but it would slow it. At 5:05 a.m. the first climbers reached the stair. Their hands grabbed the railings, and they pulled themselves up without looking down. We aimed and fired single shots. It felt wrong at that distance, but it was what we had left. When a body fell, the others climbed over the space. When a shot missed, the target did not flinch. There was no intimidation. There was only force applied, and force resisted. At 5:15 a.m., the last of our rifle magazines ran out. We had handguns with a few rounds each. We had the flare gun. We had one plan that might buy us another block of time. Down on the deck, the cargo truck Tony had moved was leaking fuel from a ruptured tank. The fuel ran along the curb line like a thin river. If we could ignite it at the right point, the fire would run south and create a curtain that nothing would cross quickly. It would also destroy any chance of retreat across the southbound lanes. There were already vehicles on fire, both north and south. The bridge is steel, but heat does things to every material. I weighed it and decided that if we did nothing, the numbers would end the conversation in minutes. If we lit it, we might still be here when the sun came up. I did not say, if the helicopters come. I had stopped thinking that way. I gave the flare gun to Sergeant Park because his hands were steadier and he had the best angle from the corner of the platform. I pointed to the fuel line on the deck and told him to aim where it pulled near the base of a stalled van. He nodded. He braced against the rail, raised the flare gun, and fired in a smooth motion. The flare arced down and struck the deck 3 yards short. It skittered and left a smear of burning compound. It still found the edge of the fuel. The line lit in a blue-orange crawl that became a rush. A wall of flame walked south along the curb and then licked outward as it found more spills. The heat reached us a moment later, a dry push that made eyes water even in the wind. The south approach became a bank of light. The effect was immediate. The movement on that side slowed and then stopped. People do not move through open flame unless they have no other sensation left. The ones who had been climbing the cable on the south face hesitated, then tried to go around the backside and lost time. The stair itself was still exposed, and the north face was still active. We adjusted the circle and covered both. At 5:30 a.m., with the fire loud below us and the grey light growing, I keyed the police radio and spoke to whatever dispatcher might still be listening. I gave our location at the South Tower platform and our status. Low on ammo, civilians present. Fire barrier established on southbound lanes. Movement on the north still increasing. I asked for an update on the aircraft. The answer was the same. Hold your position. Aircraft inbound at sunrise. The voice did not strain. It did not crack. It simply delivered the same phrase it had been told to deliver. At 5:35 a.m., Pitts used her last rifle round on a climber 3 steps from the top and then drew her sidearm. She counted her shots aloud, 3, 2, 1, and then clicked dry. Barashas had 2 left, Riley had 1. I had a handful in my pockets that I had saved for triage, and now I handed them out like coins. It felt absurd to count them in the open like that. But that is what we had. I could not manufacture what did not exist. The fire below burned hottest for a few minutes, then settled into steady pockets around the larger vehicles. The smoke rose and thinned in the wind. The bridge's cables had collected droplets of mist through the night, and they shed them now. The droplets dotting the red steel looked like someone had sprayed the structure with a hose. People still moved on the struts and the cable saddles. Their paths were direct. They did not look at the drop, only at us. At 5:45 a.m., Park fired the last flare, not at the deck but at a group climbing on the north face strut where the walkway meets the tower. The flare struck the steel and splashed burning compound. The climbers recoiled for a moment and lost their grip. 2 fell. The others paused. That bought us another minute or 2. We adjusted again. Every movement was slower now. My right hand cramped when I gripped my pistol. My shoulders ached from hours of holding the same posture. I looked at Elena and Daniel and the kids in the center and saw that they had stopped shaking. They were not calm. They were beyond that. They were watching me like I could conjure a solution out of thin air if I looked hard enough. I tried to keep my face neutral so I did not add my fear to theirs. At 5:50 a.m., the sound changed again. There was still movement on the tower, but there was also the distinct bass thump of an aircraft somewhere to the east. It was not close. It moved away. Another followed. They were likely heading south to other zones. I keyed the radio and asked again for confirmation. The same reply came. I did not answer. At 5:53 a.m., a man in a uniform from the Marin side, another officer, badge I could not read, face smeared with soot, climbed onto the lower crossbeam and called out to us. I could not hear his words, only his tone. He did not sound like he was asking for help. He sounded like he was giving an order. He took 2 steps toward us. Then one of the climbers pulled him backward by his vest, and he disappeared into the space between beams. That image stayed with me in the same flat way that medical scenes stay with you after years. You do not attach emotion to it at the time. You catalogue it. At 5:56 a.m., the first direct sunlight cut the top of the south tower. It did not flood the deck. It did not melt anything. It just drew a line of brightness along the upper crossbeam and made a long shadow on the water. Sunrise in San Francisco is something people take pictures of. On the bridge, that morning, it was an indicator on a panel that said one condition had been met and the next instructions could follow. No aircraft appeared. The only change was the way the light fell on the steel. At 5:57 a.m., I did one more sweep of the platform for anything we could use. There was a toolbox wired to the rail. Inside were wrenches, a pry bar, and a coil of rope. I pulled the rope out and checked it. It was sound. The pry bar was heavy enough to serve as a striking tool if the stair barricade failed. I handed it to Barachas. He nodded and set his feet at the stair opening. At 5:58 a.m., the movement on the north face increased. The climbers had coordinated without speaking. They came toward the stair from both sides at once. We met them with the last of our rounds, and then with the pry bar and the butt of a stock and anything else that would extend a hand's reach into a shove. The first one through the gap was small and quick. Riley blocked him with a shoulder and shoved him backward into the next. They tumbled together. The third used the momentum of the push and nearly found the opening. Park grabbed the maintenance sign and smashed it forward like a door against them. The impact rang in my ribs through the platform. At 5:59 a.m., I keyed the radio and made a final log because someone had to hear a normal voice reporting a normal thing. I said, "Golden Gate South Tower platform, survivors present, fire established southbound, stair holding, ammunition expended, civilians alive, sun above horizon." I paused, then added, "We will attempt to hold until noon or until a path opens. If we cannot, we will attempt to descend using maintenance ladders to reach the lower crossbeam and then the west sidewalk. We need a clear route to Marin medical stations. If anyone hears this, mark our position and log the time." The dispatcher answered with the same sentence as before. I closed the radio and clipped it to my vest. At 6 a.m., the sun cleared the roofline behind the city and lit the deck. The fire burned down to hot pools. The bridge hummed as traffic lights cycled on empty lanes. The stair held for the next seconds. Then the weight against it doubled. We were out of bullets. We were not out of options. I tied the rope to the platform rail with a figure-8 follow-through and pulled hard to set it. The drop to the lower maintenance beam was not clean, but it was reachable. I tested the rope with my weight. It held. I told Elena to lower Sophie first, then Max. Daniel went after them. Isaiah volunteered to hold the rope to control the descent, while I kept the stair blocked with Park and Barajas and Pitts. There is a way to move people on a rope when they have never done it. You put a loop under their arms. You keep one hand on the line above the loop and one below, and you tell them to keep their feet up until you say to drop them. You do not talk about falling. You do not say don't, you say do. We lowered both children in under 30 seconds each. Elena went down next. She slipped and swung once, hit her hip on the beam, and kept going. She did not cry out, because she had decided earlier in the night that she would not make that sound in front of her children. Choices like that become bones. When the family was on the beam, I sent Isaiah. He muttered that he was fine, and then said thank you in a way that made it clear he did not think I would hear it again. He moved well for a big man and landed steady on the beam, then turned to catch Elena's hand. Eric refused to go down without Tony. Tony would not meet my eyes. He had shut himself inside a small space where he could not process anything but breath and heartbeat. I put the loop around his chest and lowered him before he could argue. Eric went next. The stair barricade finally broke under a combined push. Park swung the maintenance sign one more time like a gate and then stepped back. Barajas brought the pry bar down on a hand that reached over the rail. Pitts used the butt of her rifle to keep space open. When I saw daylight through the stair gap, I told Park to go. He shook his head. I told him the rope needed someone strong at the bottom to help people off the beam, and that was the truth. He went. He pushed off with his hands on the rail and slid. He landed, stumbled, and stood. I was the last one up top with Barajas and Pitts. The climbers were in the opening now. There were too many to hold for more than seconds. I did not waste breath on a speech. I handed the radio to Pitts and told her to keep it if I did not make the drop. She said she would throw it back if I did. We moved to the rope. Barajas went first with the tool chest strap slung over his shoulder to use as a backup line for people on the beam. He went down fast and clean. He turned and raised his hands. I put the loop under my arms and went next. There was a second where my boot sole slipped on the rail, and I thought I would swing out and lose the beam. I did not. I found it with my heel and set both feet. I turned and looked up. Pitts was on the rail with the rifle across her chest like a lifeline. She put the loop on and looked at me the way soldiers look when they have made peace with bad math. I pulled the rope tight. She stepped off. A hand from the stair caught her boot, then lost it. She came down in a controlled slide and landed next to me. We moved along the beam to the west side, where the maintenance ladder ran down to the lower structure. It was not a simple path. It required moving sideways with the bay below, keeping hands on riveted steel that had a film of moisture. Isaiah led the family along the beam, one step at a time. Barajas went behind them with the strap as a safety. Park stayed at the ladder to help them down one by one. Eric kept his body between Tony and the edge, in a way that did not look like it, but was. I stayed near the back with Pitts and watched the platform above. The stair opening filled and then emptied as the climbers looked for another path. The rope hung down and swung in the wind. It looked like a line between one register of noise and another. We reached the ladder and started down. The lower crossbeam was wide enough to stand on with both feet. From there, we could get to the west sidewalk gate. The gate was locked. The lock was a standard shackle type with a laminated body. We did not have bolt cutters. We had a pry bar and a lot of motivation. Barajas set the bar behind the hasp and leaned on it. The steel groaned and then popped. The gate swung wide enough to slip through. We were on the west sidewalk, with the ocean at our left and the roadway at our right. The fire on the southbound lanes burned in isolated patches. The northbound lanes had movement but not a solid wall. We had a line of sight to the Marin headlands. They were not clear, but they were not covered with moving figures either. The air smelled like hot metal and diesel and salt water. We moved north along the sidewalk in a tight file. I kept counting heads and hands. It is a tick from shift work. If the number changes, something is wrong. We had 12 people. Me, Sergeant Park, Pitts, Barajas, Isaiah, Eric, Tony, Elena, Daniel, Sophie, Max, and Mrs. Tully. Riley was not with us. He had been on the deck when we left the bus. I did not see him fall. I only noticed he was not in the count when we started down the ladder. That is the thing people do not mention when they talk about control. You lose track during movement. You only know it when you stop. I logged his name in my head and moved on, because the living needed my attention. We met 2 people on the sidewalk moving south. They were intact, dirt-streaked, eyes clear. One was a cyclist who had abandoned his bike because he could not push it through the cluster of people. The other was a woman carrying a cat in a duffel bag with the zipper open just enough so it could breathe. They saw us and stepped aside to let us pass without asking for help we could not give. That choice saved us all. If they had tried to join, our line would have slowed, and the movement on the northbound lanes might have noticed us. They understood that the best help we could give them was to not take them with us into more danger. Halfway to the North Tower, we looked down and saw the helicopters. They were heading south along the Bayshore Freeway, not toward us. They were moving at a speed that told me they were not on a search pattern. They were going somewhere they had already been told to go. They would not be stopping. I did not say anything. No one asked. We all saw the direction. We reached the North Tower base and crossed to the inside of the railing where the sidewalk meets the toll plaza area. The plaza was empty. The booths were closed. The lanes were marked with red X's and green arrows that meant nothing now. Beyond the plaza, the approach road curved toward the Waldo Tunnel. The tunnel mouth was dark and quiet. There were cars parked in the breakdown lanes, and some in the middle, with doors open. The wind was less here. The light was stronger. The clock on the radio clicked to 6:10 a.m. We stopped in the shadow of the tower and took a breath. I checked everyone for obvious injuries. Elena's hip was bruised. Park's thigh wound had seeped again. Pitt's wrist burn was blistered. Eric's hands were torn up from hauling sandbags. Tony stared ahead at nothing. Isaiah rubbed his shoulders and said he was fine. The children were quiet and focused on the way Daniel's hand squeezed theirs. Mrs. Tully's scarf was black with soot. She smiled for the first time all night, not because anything was good, but because we were still moving. I keyed the radio and made another log. North end of Golden Gate Bridge, Toll Plaza approach, survivors 12, moving north on foot. No immediate pursuit on West Sidewalk. Fire present on southbound lanes near South Tower. Request guidance to nearest functioning medical station and safe corridor. The reply was static for a long second. Then a new voice came on, lower and tired. It said, "Copy your position. Nearest aid station reported at Marin City Community Center as of 1 hour ago. No confirmation on current status. Advise avoiding tunnel if possible. Report any mass movement. Godspeed." It was the first time anyone on the radio had dropped the script since the night began. We stepped off the bridge onto Marin ground at 6:14 a.m. I looked back once at the tower and the cables. The fire was mostly smoke now. The deck was still not clear. The platform where we had stood was a small rectangle in a huge structure that could swallow anything without a trace. I did not tell myself that we had won anything. We had not. We had moved from one problem to another with fewer tools, but we were not dead, and that had to be enough for the next hour. We took the side path that runs along the west of the toll plaza and down toward the parking area near Battery Spencer. From there, a footpath cuts to Consulman Road and drops into the hills above the tunnel. The plan was simple, because it had to be. We would avoid the tunnel. We would stay on open ground with clear lines of sight. We would keep moving until we reached a cluster of houses where we could find water and a place to rest behind a locked door. Then we would decide whether to try for Marin City or for the back roads towards Sausalito. The radio would stay on. If it went dead, we would not wait for it to speak again. We walked. We did not look back again. I kept the count in my head and matched it to the beat of my steps. 12, 12, 12. The city behind us kept burning in pockets and then did not. The ocean to our left was flat and reflective in the first real light. The bridge hummed behind us like something alive. People will tell stories about that night with dramatic turns and easy heroics. The record I'm making is not to answer those stories or to replace them. It is so that the next time someone is told to hold a line with too few rounds and too many scared eyes, they will have something practical to follow. Build the wall, count the magazines, change the barrel before it cooks. Do not promise what you do not control. Move when staying kills your options. Keep the children in the middle, carry rope, tie good knots. When the sun comes up and there are still people breathing, call out enough to keep going to the next hour. That is what we did. By 6:30 a.m, we were off the span and into the headlands, following the road contours and using the pullouts as checkpoints. I walked beside Sergeant Park. He was limping and sweating through his shirt, but his spine looked like a line drawn with a ruler. He asked me if I wanted to make the final log on the radio. I told him to do it, because his voice sounded like authority even when it was tired. He pressed the transmit button and said, "Golden Gate check. Survivors clear northbound on foot. Bridge south span compromised by fire at southbound curb near South Tower. Recommend no civilian crossing. Marking time. Sunrise, day 2. He let go of the button and clipped the radio back to his vest. We kept walking. The plan was not elegant. It did not need to be. It needed to get 12 people from a steel platform to a doorway with a lock. We had enough daylight to try. We used it. And when we stopped at the first house that still had its door intact and its windows unbroken, we did what we had done all night. We set a perimeter, we inventoried what we had left, and we made a new plan for the next block of time. That is how you live through something that does not care if you do. You do not wait for a perfect answer. You do the next thing that keeps you moving. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.